Jonah, Baba Yaga. Ross pressed his back against the cold, metallic wall of the outpost, blood dripping steadily from a gash on his side. The wound throbbed with every shallow breath, but his focus remained razor-sharp. The air inside the abandoned Galactic Empire facility reeked of burnt circuits and stale ozone, the remnants of a firefight that had left him cornered. Shadows danced across the walls as dim emergency lights flickered, casting an eerie glow over the rusted corridors. Somewhere in the darkness, they were coming for him. The voice crackled over the comm embedded in his suit, smooth and mocking. Jonah Ross, Don Tyler drawled, the legendary Baba Yaga, reduced to hiding like a wounded animal. I expected more from you. Disappointing, really? Jonah ignored the taunt, his hand tightening around the grip of his plasma pistol. The serrated blade strapped to his thigh was a comforting weight, but his dwindling energy told him that brute force wouldn't be enough this time. His mind raced, analyzing the layout of the outpost. He had memorized it during his infiltration. Yet the Empire's assassins had boxed him in like a pack of predators herding their prey. Think you can last much longer? Don continued, his voice dripping with smug amusement. Aiden warned us you were tough, but I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to trust him. Guess we all learn the hard way, don't we? The mention of Aiden stung more than the wound on his side. Aiden Blizzard, his friend, his brother in arms. The man who had saved his life more times than he could count had sold him out. Jonah clenched his jaw, pushing the thought aside. There would be time to settle that score later, assuming he survived the next few minutes. A faint sound, a scrape of a boot against metal, pulled him from his thoughts. They were close. He holstered the pistol, opting for silence over firepower. Sliding along the wall, he moved toward the far end of the corridor, where a flickering console offered the faintest glow. The room beyond it was a storage bay filled with crates and equipment. A dead end, but with cover. He'd make a stand there. He slipped inside, his boots silent on the grated floor. The crates were stacked haphazardly, creating narrow pathways and blind corners. Perfect for an ambush. Jonah crouched behind a particularly large container, his breathing shallow but controlled. He could hear them now. Muted footsteps, hushed whispers. They were skilled, but not perfect. He could use that. A shadow passed across the entrance, and his pulse quickened. The first assassin stepped into the room, sleek armor gleaming under the faint light. Jonah waited, muscles coiled like a spring. As the figure moved deeper into the bay, another followed, then another. 3. No, 4. He counted their footsteps, the soft hum of their gear. They fanned out, sweeping the area with disciplined precision. Don's voice echoed through the comm again, his tone almost playful. You know, Jonah, this would all go a lot easier if you just gave up. I might even make it quick. For old time's sake. Jonah smirked, though the effort made his side ache. You talk too much, Don, he muttered under his breath. One of the assassins moved closer to his hiding spot, the faint glow of his visor illuminating the crates. Jonah's fingers tightened around the hilt of his blade. The assassin stopped, head tilting as if sensing something. He never got the chance to confirm his suspicions. In one fluid motion, Jonah surged forward, the blade flashing as it found the gap between the assassin's helmet and chest plate. The man crumpled without a sound. The others reacted instantly, their movements sharp and efficient. Plasma bolts lit up the room as they fired toward the disturbance. But Jonah was already gone, slipping between the crates like a shadow. He fired his pistol, the shots precise and deliberate. One assassin fell, clutching a smoking hole in his chest. The remaining 2 adjusted their positions, one moving to flank while the other laid down, suppressing fire. Jonah dove behind another crate, his mind racing. His wound burned, and his vision blurred at the edges, but he forced himself to focus. He pulled a small device from his belt, a sonic emitter. It wasn't much, but it would buy him a few seconds. Activating it, he tossed it toward the flanking assassin. The device exploded in a burst of sound and light, disorienting the man long enough for Jonah to put a bolt through his head. The last assassin hesitated, clearly reconsidering his odds. Jonah capitalized on the moment, closing the distance in a blur of motion. The fight was brutal and short, ending with the assassin's own weapon turned against him. As the body hit the floor, Jonah staggered, leaning against a crate for support. His chest heaved and his vision swam. He couldn't keep this up much longer. "Well done, Jonah," Don said, his tone almost admiring. "But you're running out of tricks. And time." Jonah glanced toward the entrance, where new footsteps echoed. More of them. Of course. Don wasn't going to risk himself when he could send wave after wave of expendable soldiers. Jonah's grip tightened on his pistol, but deep down he knew the truth. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and dangerously close to collapse. If he was going to die, he'd make sure to take as many of them with him as possible. The assassins moved into the room, their movements deliberate and predatory. Jonah straightened, his face a mask of defiance despite the blood staining his suit. He raised his pistol, ready to sell his life dearly. And then he heard it, a low, rumbling growl that sent a shiver down his spine. The assassins froze, their helmets snapping toward the sound. It came again, closer this time, deep and primal. Jonah's lips curved into a faint, almost incredulous smile. "Don," he said, his voice hoarse but steady, "you might want to rethink your plan." The growl turned into a roar, and from the shadows emerged a pair of glowing eyes, followed by a massive, striped figure. The assassins hesitated, their confidence wavering. Jonah stepped back, his smile widening despite the pain. "Meet Claw," he said softly. He's not a fan of uninvited guests. The tiger lunged, and chaos erupted. Claw's roar echoed through the storage bay, drowning out the panicked shouts of the assassins. His claws raked across the nearest target, shredding armor as though it were paper. The assassin screamed, his weapon falling to the floor as Claw's jaws closed around his shoulder, ending the struggle in a brutal instant. Jonah leaned heavily against the crate, his vision still blurred, but he couldn't help the faint smile tugging at his lips. Claw had a way of shifting the odds in his favor, even in the bleakest situations. The tiger was no ordinary predator, genetically enhanced and trained for combat. Claw was faster, stronger, and smarter than anything the Galactic Empire could have prepared for. And, as Jonah had learned over time, fiercely loyal. The remaining assassins hesitated, their previous confidence unraveling with every second. Plasma bolts hissed through the air as they tried to bring the tiger down, but Claw was relentless. He weaved through their fire with predatory grace, his movements fluid and calculated. One assassin turned to run, only to be intercepted with a single, devastating swipe. He crumpled to the ground, motionless. "Pull it together," Don's voice barked through the comms, his calm veneer finally cracking. "It's just an animal. Take it down." The assassins tried to regroup, their formations tightening as they adjusted to the new threat. Claw, however, was already circling them, his low growl vibrating through the room like a living warning. Jonah used the moment to steady himself, forcing his body to move despite the pain. He knew Claw couldn't handle this alone, not against the Empire's elite killers. Jonah raised his pistol and fired, the shot catching one of the assassins in the back. The man fell, his armor sparking as he hit the ground. The others turned, momentarily torn between the tiger and the wounded man still fighting back. That hesitation cost them. Claw lunged again, taking down another assassin with ruthless efficiency. Jonah's voice rasped through the chaos. "Don, you really should have done your homework on Earth's predators." "Cute," Don replied, though his tone had lost its earlier smugness. "But this little sideshow doesn't change anything. You're still trapped, and your tiger can't save you forever." Jonah ignored the comment, his focus shifting to the dwindling group of assassins. The fight was messy, brutal, and fast. Claw moved with a precision that bordered on supernatural, his instincts honed to perfection. But even he wasn't invincible. A plasma bolt grazed his flank, and the tiger let out a snarl of pain, his movements faltering for just a moment. Claw! Jonah's shout cut through the din, his concern evident. The tiger glanced back at him, his golden eyes sharp despite the injury. The connection between them was unspoken but clear. Neither of them was going down without a fight. Jonah pushed himself forward, his body protesting with every step. He fired again, his shots deliberate and deadly. The remaining assassins were thinning, their ranks unable to withstand the combined assault of man and beast. One by one, they fell, until the last man standing dropped his weapon and ran, his courage shattered. Claw let out a low growl, his body tense, as if ready to pursue. Jonah shook his head, his voice firm but gentle. Let him go. We've made enough noise already. The tiger hesitated, then relented, padding over to Jonah's side. His massive head nudged Jonah's shoulder, the gesture surprisingly tender given the carnage that had just unfolded. Jonah reached out, his fingers brushing against the tiger's fur. You did good, buddy. Claw rumbled in response, a sound that was almost comforting. Despite his exhaustion, Jonah couldn't help but chuckle. You know, I think Don's having second thoughts about calling us fragile. The calm crackled again, Don's voice cutting through the quiet. Impressive, Jonah. Really. I'll admit, I underestimated your little pet. But don't think for a second this is over. Jonah's jaw tightened. He glanced at the bodies scattered around the room, his mind already calculating the next move. Don wasn't bluffing. This was just a beginning, and they both knew it. You're running out of people, Don, Jonah said, his tone cold. How many more are you willing to throw away before you come down here yourself? Don laughed, though the sound was strained. Oh, I'll come for you, Jonah, when the time is right. But for now, consider this a warm-up. I'll be watching. The calm went silent, and Jonah exhaled, his shoulders sagging. Claw sat beside him, his tail flicking lazily as if the fight had been nothing more than an afternoon stroll. Jonah couldn't help but grin despite the situation. Warm-up, huh? Guess that makes us the main event. The humor was fleeting, though, as the reality of their predicament set in. Jonah knew they couldn't stay here. The outpost was compromised, and Don's forces would regroup soon enough. He needed a plan, and fast. He glanced at Claw, the tiger's steady presence grounding him. All right, big guy, let's see if this place has anything useful left. The two moved cautiously through the outpost, their footsteps echoing in the now quiet corridors. Jonah's body ached with every movement, but he pushed through, knowing they didn't have the luxury of rest. They reached what appeared to be a control room, the consoles flickering weakly as the emergency power struggled to keep them operational. Jonah approached the main terminal, his fingers flying across the interface. The database was locked behind layers of encryption, but Jonah had dealt with worse. As he worked, Claw stood guard, his ears twitching at every sound. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of machinery and the occasional hiss of sparks. Finally, the terminal beeped, and the screen lit up with lines of data. Jonah's eyes narrowed as he scanned the information. Schematics, personnel logs, mission reports. It was all here. But one file caught his attention. A recent communication from Don. The message was brief, but it confirmed Jonah's worst fears. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a campaign. The Empire wanted him dead, and they were willing to spare no expense to make it happen. Jonah leaned back, his mind racing. He needed to find Don before Don found him. And to do that, he needed to stay one step ahead of the Empire's assassins. His gaze shifted to Claw, who was watching him intently, as if sensing his thoughts. Well, Jonah said, a hint of a smile returning to his face. Looks like we've got our work cut out for us. Claw let out a soft growl, his tail swishing in what Jonah liked to think was agreement. Together, they stepped away from the terminal, ready to face whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in hours, Jonah felt a spark of hope. They weren't just surviving, they were winning. And Don Tyler had no idea what was coming for him. Jonah paced the dimly lit room, his movements slow and deliberate, each step calculated to mask the weariness pulling at his body. Claw lay nearby, his massive form sprawled on the cool metallic floor, tail twitching lazily as his golden eyes tracked Jonah's every move. The silence between them was companionable but heavy, charged with unspoken tension. Outside, the barren expanse of the outpost stretched endlessly, a hostile reminder of how isolated they truly were. The betrayal still gnawed at Jonah's thoughts like an open wound. Aiden Blizzard. The name carried weight, like a blade pressed to his throat. He had trusted Aiden with everything, shared battlefields, donies, and scars. And now, Aiden was the reason Jonah was bleeding on this forsaken outpost, hunted by the Empire's deadliest killers. Jonah paused, staring at the cracked terminal screen in front of him. The data he'd extracted earlier illuminated the room with its flickering light, offering more questions than answers. He scrolled through the files, each line of encrypted text another piece of the Empire's puzzle. The truth was buried here somewhere, and Jonah intended to dig it out. "Why, Aiden?" he muttered under his breath, his voice low but bitter. What was worth throwing it all away? Claw rumbled softly, a sound that was both a reassurance and a prompt to keep moving. Jonah glanced at him, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, sitting around won't fix anything. Let's see what else they've got." His fingers danced over the keys, bypassing encryption protocols with practiced ease. The screen shifted, revealing a series of communications flagged as high priority. One name stood out among the senders: Don Tyler. Jonah clicked the file, and Don's smirking face appeared, captured in a still from a recorded message. He hit play, his stomach tightening with dread. The message began with Don's voice, dripping with that familiar smugness. "Aiden, your intel on Ross was exceptional. I have to admit, I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. But here we are, and I couldn't be more pleased." The legendary Baba Yaga, brought to his knees by the man who knew him best. Poetic, isn't it? Jonah's jaw clenched as Don's words sank in. He could picture Aiden sitting across from Don, calm and composed, his betrayal carefully masked behind a facade of professionalism. Don continued, his tone growing colder. "Once Ross is dealt with, we'll proceed with the next phase. You'll get your reward, as promised. But make no mistake, Blizzard. If you think for a second that I trust you, you're sorely mistaken. Betrayal runs in your blood. After all." The recording ended abruptly, leaving Jonah staring at the screen, his fists clenched. Aiden hadn't just sold him out. He'd orchestrated everything, delivered him to the Empire on a silver platter. And now, it seemed, Aiden was in over his head, dancing to Don's tune like a puppet on a string. Jonah leaned back, exhaling slowly. His mind raced, piecing together the fragmented information. Aiden's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was part of a much larger scheme. The Empire wasn't just hunting him. They were hunting all of humanity's remaining elite operatives. A purge, calculated and ruthless, designed to eliminate any threat to their dominance. Claw stirred, rising to his feet with a low growl. His ears twitched, and his gaze shifted to the doorway, his body tensing. Jonah followed his line of sight, instinctively reaching for his weapon. The room was still, the faint hum of the terminal the only sound. But Jonah trusted Claw's instincts implicitly. "Company," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Claw rumbled in response, confirming his suspicion. Jonah moved to the terminal, quickly transferring the critical files to a portable drive. He couldn't afford to leave any evidence behind, not when it could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. The transfer completed with a soft beep, and Jonah pocketed the drive, his focus already shifting to the impending threat. The first footsteps echoed down the corridor, deliberate and measured. Jonah crouched behind a console, his pistol drawn, while Claw slinked into the shadows, his massive frame disappearing with surprising ease. The door slid open, and two figures stepped inside, their armor gleaming under the terminal's flickering light. "Clear this room and report back," one of them ordered, his voice cold and mechanical through his helmet. Tyler wants confirmation. The other nodded, scanning the room with a cautious efficiency that marked him as a professional. Jonah waited, his grip on the pistol steady, his breathing controlled. Timing was everything. The second figure moved closer to the terminal, his attention focused on the screen. Jonah struck without hesitation, his pistol firing a single, silent shot that dropped the man instantly. Before the first could react, Claw lunged from the shadows, his jaws clamping down with bone-crushing force. The fight was over in seconds. Jonah straightened, his expression grim. They're not giving us much breathing room, are they? Claw patted over, his muzzle stained, but his eyes calm. Jonah crouched beside him, running a hand through the tiger's fur. Good work, big guy. But we need to move. If they don't check in, more will come. They slipped out of the room, moving through the dim corridors with practiced stealth. The outpost felt colder now, the weight of the betrayal settling, like frost in Jonah's chest. As they reached the outer perimeter, Jonah paused, his gaze fixed on the desolate landscape beyond. This isn't just about me anymore, he said quietly, more to himself than to Claw. If they're targeting us, our kind, then we're all in danger. And Aiden's at the center of it. Claw nudged his arm, a silent reminder to stay focused. Jonah nodded, his resolve hardening. Right, one step at a time. Let's get off this rock first. They moved toward the hangar, where a single, battered shuttle awaited. It wasn't much, but it would get them out of the system and buy them time. Jonah's mind churned with plans and contingencies, but one thought stood out above the rest. Aiden had made his choice, and now Jonah would make his. He would find Aiden, and when he did, there would be no more room for betrayal or lies. The game was far from over, and Jonah intended to end it on his terms. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, Jonah glanced back at the outpost, its shadowy silhouette shrinking in the distance. His grip tightened on the controls, and for the first time in days, a sense of clarity settled over him. The path ahead was dangerous and uncertain, but it was one he would walk with unyielding determination. Beside him, Claw sat alert, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, and the Empire had no idea what was coming for them. The barren moon was silent except for the low hum of energy shields surrounding the battleground. Craters and jagged rock formations cast long, eerie shadows under the blood-red light of the distant star. Jonah Baba Yaga, Ross stood on the edge of the open expanse, his eyes scanning the enemy forces spread before him. The sleek armor of Don Tyler's elite assassins gleamed menacingly, their weapons bristling with lethal potential. At the center of it all stood Don himself, his posture relaxed but his gaze razor-sharp. Beside him, Aiden Blizzard, the traitor, looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot as though the weight of his betrayal had finally begun to settle. Jonah's grip tightened around his rifle. Claw moved silently beside him, the tiger's massive frame blending with the shadows of the craters. Despite the overwhelming odds, there was no fear in Jonah's heart, only resolve. He had come too far, lost too much, to falter now. The moment demanded nothing less than everything he had. Don's voice rang out, amplified by his suit's comm system. Ross, you should feel honored. We rolled out the best for your grand finale. I hope you're ready to die as spectacularly as you lived. Jonah stepped forward, his boots crunching against the rocky ground. His voice, though quieter, carried a weight that cut through Don's bravado. You've spent this entire chase talking, Don. I'm here to finish it. Don's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. Bold words from a man outnumbered 10-1. Jonah glanced at Claw, who crouched low, his golden eyes locked on the assassins. A faint smile touched Jonah's lips. You're forgetting one thing, Don. I don't fight alone. With that, the battle erupted. The first shot came from Jonah's rifle, a precise bolt of plasma that struck an assassin square in the chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. Claw surged forward like a force of nature, his roar splitting the air as he leapt onto the nearest enemy. The assassins responded in kind, their weapons blazing as they advanced, but Jonah and Claw moved with deadly synchronicity, their bond forged in countless battles. Jonah ducked behind a jagged rock formation, his rifle spitting fire as he picked off targets with calculated precision. Every movement was deliberate, every shot lethal. His mind was a battlefield of its own, weighing angles and probabilities with machine-like efficiency. But the numbers were still against him, and the assassins were well-trained. Plasma bolts scorched the air around him, forcing him to keep moving, to stay one step ahead. Claw, meanwhile, was a blur of claws and fangs. He tore through the enemy ranks with savage grace, his enhanced instincts making him nearly impossible to pin down. An assassin aimed a grenade launcher at the tiger, but before he could fire, Claw pounced, dragging the man to the ground in a flurry of snarls and blood. Jonah couldn't suppress a grim smile. They might call Claw an animal, but here on this desolate moon, he was a king. As the assassins fell one by one, Don finally stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from smug observer to active participant. He drew a sleek, double-barreled plasma cannon, the weapon humming with destructive energy. Jonah barely had time to react before Don fired, the blast obliterating the rock formation he'd been using for cover. The force of the explosion sent him sprawling, his rifle skittering out of reach. "Stay down, Ross!" Don shouted, his voice carrying an edge of triumph. "This is the end of the line." Jonah gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his feet despite the pain lancing through his body. "You don't get it, do you?" he called back, his voice steady despite the odds. "You think this is about me. It's not." Don tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. "Oh, enlighten me." "This is about every person you've hunted, every life you've destroyed for your precious empire," Jonah said, his hand moving slowly to the blade strapped to his thigh. "You think you're untouchable, but everyone falls eventually. Even you." Don's smirk returned, but before he could respond, a deafening roar cut through the tension. Claw emerged from the shadows, his massive form streaked with blood, but his movements no less powerful. He charged at Don, forcing the man to pivot and fire. The blast grazed Claw's shoulder, but it wasn't enough to stop him. He slammed into Don with bone-crushing force, knocking the cannon from his hands. Jonah seized the opportunity, closing the distance between himself and Don. The two men collided in a brutal exchange of blows, each strike fueled by years of animosity and personal vendettas. Don was strong, his armor giving him an edge, but Jonah fought with the ferocity of a man who had nothing left to lose. Every punch, every movement was calculated to exploit the smallest weakness. Behind him, Claw kept the remaining assassins at bay, his roars a symphony of defiance. Blood stained the ground, but the tiger never faltered, his loyalty to Jonah unwavering. For every assassin that fell, another hesitated, their fear evident in the way they moved, their confidence shattered by the sheer tenacity of man and beast. Jonah finally gained the upper hand, wrenching Don's arm behind his back and slamming him into the ground. He pressed his blade to Don's throat, his voice low and dangerous. "Where's Aiden?" Don laughed, though it was tinged with bitterness. "You think he'll come running to save you? He's already halfway to the Empire's core worlds by now. You'll never catch him." Jonah's grip tightened on the blade. "That's where you're wrong. I don't need to catch him. He'll come to me." Don's eyes flickered with unease, the first crack in his arrogant facade. Before he could speak again, Claw appeared at Jonah's side, his golden eyes locked on Don with a predatory intensity. Jonah met the tiger's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "You've lost, Don," Jonah said, his voice calm but final. "And if Aiden wants to finish what he started, he knows where to find me." With that, Jonah rose, pulling Don to his feet and shoving him toward the remaining assassins. "Get out of here. Tell the Empire what you saw. Tell them what's coming." Don hesitated, his pride warring with his survival instincts, but the sight of Claw's bared fangs made the decision for him. He turned and fled, his forces retreating with him, their formation broken and scattered. As the battlefield fell silent, Jonah looked out over the carnage, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Claw stood beside him, his presence a steady anchor in the aftermath of chaos. Jonah reached out, resting a hand on the tiger's blood-streaked fur. "We did it, big guy," Claw rumbled softly, his tail swishing in what could only be described as satisfaction. Together, they turned and began the long walk back to the shuttle. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. Aiden was still out there, and the Empire's grip on the galaxy remained strong. But for the first time in a long time, Jonah felt hope. As the horizon loomed ahead, Jonah allowed himself a small smile. They had survived, against all odds. And as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't face.